Welcome to the second part of our video on the sources of the UK Constitution, presented by Dr. Fulu Sundar Megwar. Today, we will cover constitutional conventions, authoritative writings, and the royal prerogative. We will also touch upon the influence of jurists, EU law, and how these non-legal and legal sources interact. We begin with Part 1, Constitutional Conventions. Sir Ivor Jennings famously called them the flesh which clothes the dry bones of the law, highlighting their vital role in bringing the formal legal structure to life. Constitutional conventions are non-legal rules of political practice, considered binding by those who apply them. They are essential for constitutional morality and arise from custom, not Parliament or the courts. Conventions present a binding paradox. They are politically binding due to the threat of public outcry, yet non-legal, as courts cannot enforce them. They transform the exercise of legal powers into democratic practice. The key characteristics of conventions include being practice-based, requiring a history of precedent, acceptance through a moral obligation to comply, and flexibility to evolve quickly, such as the Salisbury Convention. A major area where conventions operate is the executive. For instance, while the monarch has the legal power to appoint anyone as PM, convention dictates they must appoint the leader of the party with a majority. Conventions face criticism due to lack of enforcement and uncertainty. They rely heavily on political morality, which can be vulnerable in polarized political climates. Moving to Part 2, Authoritative Writings. These academic foundations provide crucial understanding for the UK's uncodified constitution. As the UK Constitution is uncodified, authoritative writings provide necessary logic and structure. While not law, they are highly persuasive, guiding judges, explaining the state's workings, and offering historical context. Albert Vendice's Introduction to the Study of the Law of the Constitution is a cornerstone. He established the two pillars, parliamentary sovereignty and the rule of law. Walter Bagehot's The English Constitution distinguished between the dignified parts, like the monarchy, and the efficient parts, such as the cabinet, which truly govern. Erskine May's, quote, treatise on the law, privileges, proceedings, and usage of Parliament is known as the Bible of Parliament, serving as the absolute authority on legislative procedure. Finally, we introduce Part 3, the royal prerogatives, which represent the residual discretionary power of the Crown. Dicey defined the royal prerogative as the residue of discretionary or arbitrary authority legally left to the Crown. These powers originated with absolute monarchs and have not been removed by Parliament or the courts. The nature of prerogative powers is critical. They originate in common law, are residual, meaning they cannot create new powers, and are mainly exercised by government ministers in the name of the monarch. Prerogatives fall into three main types: domestic, such as appointing the prime minister; foreign affairs, including treaty-making and declaring war; and legal immunities, historically ensuring the king could do no wrong. These powers face limits, primarily through statutory displacement, where a statute covering the same ground takes precedence. Additionally, modern judicial control ensures prerogatives cannot override statute or common law rights. We now move to Part 4, Jurists' Commentaries, which provide a systematic synthesis of English law. Sir William Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England was the first systematic explanation of English law. It influenced constitutional thinking in the UK and the early USA, defining the rights of individuals and powers of the Crown. Jurists influence courts by providing, quote, evidence of law for old common law principles, and, quote, gap-filling when no case law or statute exists. Contemporary jurists also shape modern views on the rule of law. We begin Part 5, European Union Law. This addresses the supranational influence on the UK Constitution during the period from 1973 to 2020. The UK's joining of the EEC in 1973 introduced a supranational source of law, challenging the traditional view of absolute parliamentary sovereignty. The European Communities Act 1972 was the gateway statute, incorporating EU law directly. Section 2(4) mandated UK courts to interpret domestic law consistently with EU law, granting EU law supreme authority. The pre-Brexit impact saw increased executive power, judicial power to review acts of Parliament against EU law, and new enforceable rights for citizens. Brexit led to the EU Withdrawal Act 2018, which repealed the ECA 1972, ending EU law supremacy. While retained EU law ensured continuity, Parliament has regained sovereignty, and UK courts are no longer bound by ECJ decisions. Finally, we examine Part 6, the relationship among sources, including interconnectivity, conflict, and constitutional balance. In the case of conflict, statute versus convention, the Miller No. 1 ruling reaffirmed that conventions, even when written, remain political rules and are not legally enforceable by judges. In conflicts between statute and prerogative, statute is supreme. The Miller No. 2 case demonstrated that the courts oversee the limits and existence of prerogative powers, ensuring they do not frustrate Parliament's constitutional role. The constitutional balance shows the interplay between Parliament as the legislative heart, the executive operating through prerogative and convention, the judiciary as the moral compass, and academic writings providing the theoretical framework. To summarize, the UK Constitution draws its strength from multiple, interconnected sources, including both legally enforceable laws and politically binding practices. The strengths of this multi-sourced constitution include flexibility, allowing conventions to change rapidly with societal values without needing slow legislation. It also offers stability through historical writings and the Crown, providing dignified continuity. Pragmatism allows for swift state action during emergencies via residual prerogative powers. However, weaknesses exist, such as a lack of clarity. Non-law sources, like conventions, create ambiguity for citizens regarding their rights. Concerns include executive overreach, where prerogative powers can bypass parliamentary scrutiny, and a democratic deficit, as historical views may not reflect modern democratic values. In conclusion, the UK Constitution is a unique mix of ancient legal powers, modern political practice, and centuries of academic wisdom. Understanding the interplay of these sources is vital for legal professionals. As a final thought, remember, the Constitution is not a document, but a living organism that evolves through law, practice, and the intellect of its scholars. Thank you for watching this video on the sources of the UK Constitution. We hope this has provided valuable insight into this complex topic.